All right, so as we do our dissection, just to give you a couple ideas about it. So really, people sometimes think when you do a dissection, you're like cutting lots of things up. Really, there's not very much cutting involved in a good dissection. You have to cut to expose the internal organs, but then most of a dissection is just sort of separating different types of tissue, viewing different things. Sometimes we cut out certain organs that are blocking other organs after we've seen them, but it's not a lot of cutting. And it's also important, and we'll talk about this as we actually get to the lab, that we're respectful of the animal, okay? That we're not just cutting things up to be funny or just because you thought it would be a fun thing to do. But you're looking at different organs, you're checking them out, you're seeing how they're connected, seeing what they look like inside of the frog, but you're doing it in a respectful manner. So once you expose the internal organs of a frog, like I said, they're pretty similar to human organs. And we'll talk about some of those similarities here. But this is kind of the overview of a diagram. The problem is that when you're looking at a diagram like this, things never look this clear. Things are never nice and separate and, you know, different colors. They're not labeled for you, so it doesn't look so neat when you're actually doing the dissection. I'll show you some pictures of a dissected frog as we go through this. Talia?
So when you showed us the picture in the packet where like that orange stuff was
Yes.
was that like stuff going through his
Yep.
body? Was it
Yeah.
fat?
All right, so let's talk about organs. Are you guys familiar with a lot of these?
Yeah.
All right. So what about the liver? What is the function of the liver? Dylan?
Take things from your blood.
Yeah, it helps to filter your blood. It does a few things. Helps to filter your blood, toxins and so forth out of your blood. Anything else? It also produces a substance called bile. Have you heard of bile? Bile is a part of our digestive juices. Bile digests fat, and it's produced in the liver. So the liver is, when you look inside of the frog, or if you were to look inside of a human, one of the largest organs. Anyone like liver, to eat liver?
No.
So if you have liver, maybe like your grandparents or someone eats liver as a meal, it's calf's liver, it's from a cow. It's sort of a brownish, reddish kind of color.
I think I've seen it. I've heard
Yeah,
of
you've probably
on
seen it.
this.
So when we look inside the frog, the liver is obvious. It's like the easiest organ to recognize. As soon as you open up the frog, the brown thing that you see right in the middle is the liver. It's large, and in the frog it contains three what we call lobes, sort of three sections. It's all basically the same color and consistency, but it has, you could see, here's one section, here's one section, here's one section. So those are three lobes of the liver. Is this working? I thought it did, maybe not.
Did you dissect this one?
No. All right. So liver secretes bile, helps to filter our blood. Sort of connected to the liver is the gallbladder. Do you know what the gallbladder does? David?
It's like the next, it comes right after the digestive system that like.
No, it's not. Food never goes through the gallbladder. Dan?
It brings stuff from your stomach to your bladder.
No.
It like releases extra waste.
No. So the liver makes bile. Okay, this this fluid that digests fats, and it sends it to the gallbladder. The gallbladder just stores it for a little while until it's actually needed by the digestive system. Humans have a gallbladder. Sometimes it gets, people have gallbladder disease, like my wife did, and she had her gallbladder removed. Could easily live without it, because then if it gets removed, then the liver just sends the bile directly into the small intestine. It's just not stored. Problem is that sometimes Person might have some trouble digesting like fatty meals because you don't have the storage of bile that can be squirted into the small intestine when you have a fatty meal. They might sometimes have some hard time digesting like a high fat meal.
So bile does. So if there's something that digests fat, does anything digest?
Yeah, there's other enzymes which digest proteins and carbohydrates and so forth. The bile duct is basically the tube that transports the bile. Any duct is a tube. Now to find the gallbladder when you're dissecting a frog is a little bit tougher. You have to lift up. It's like hiding under the lobes of the liver. So you have to kind of lift up a lobe of the liver, and underneath there is going to be a little thing. I think this is not a good picture of it because the color's wrong. In our frogs, it's always greenish yellow, and it looks like a little deflated pea. Like, you know, if you have a cooked pea and you squeeze it, and you squeeze the inside of the pea out, and you're just left with that shell thing, that's exactly what it looks like. Okay, and it's underneath the, see, this probe, it's holding back the liver's like lobe is lifted up, and it's touching this little, in this case it's reddish black, in ours it's greenish yellow. That's the gallbladder. So liver makes bile, sends it into this little pea-shaped thing to store, and then that sends the bile into the digestive system.
What kind of frog do you digest?
What kind? I think they're grass frogs.
Oh, so they look that.
No, those are bullfrogs.
Oh, those.
Oh, no, like those ones, yes. The heart, obviously, what's the function of the heart?
So to pump blood.
To pump blood throughout the body. What kind of heart do frogs have? Three-chambered, 2 atrium and a ventricle.
Oh, that's not that bad.
So the frog's heart is anterior to its liver, towards the head compared to the liver, right in the middle of the body. And so you see this whole thing is the heart. This probe is touching the ventricle, and then these are the 2 atrium. So that's the heart of the frog. The esophagus, just like our esophagus, tube that carries food from the mouth to the stomach. In frogs, the esophagus is much, much shorter than ours. Our esophagus has to bring food all the way from our mouth down to our stomach, so it's a fair way to go. In frogs, the stomach and mouth are much closer together. So if you look, it's way in the back of the frog's throat is the beginning of the esophagus. Then if you look on the inside of the frog, it's attached to the stomach, very high up on the frog. Stomach. What's the function of the stomach? Jeremy? Yeah, to help start digesting food. It's filled with what? Acid, hydrochloric acid. That's why it's an awful place for an embryo to grow. It helps break down, take solid food that's been swallowed. And frogs, they swallow their food whole. They don't have teeth to chew their food. Basically just gulp it down, swallow it. And in the stomach, hydrochloric acid starts to break it down. It's muscular, it kind of churns things around a little bit. It's pretty easy to identify in the frog. It's on the frog's left side. It's sort of shaped kind of like a banana. Okay, so this is the stomach. You would find that up here, hiding behind the liver and stuff, is the esophagus, but this part is the stomach. Now, the size of the stomach might vary. Sometimes you might dissect a frog, and the stomach is quite enlarged. Usually that's because it has food in it. The stomach can expand and shrink depending on if the frog. So if the frog ate relatively soon before it was killed, it may still have food in the stomach. One year, several years ago, I think students that did it would be seniors now. They opened up their frog, and the stomach was huge. And I knew there was something in it. So when they dissected it, what they found was like a whole intact crayfish inside of the frog's stomach. And they opened up the stomach, took this whole crayfish out, and basically had a whole crayfish inside of that frog's stomach. Sometimes you find little bits of leaves and things that the frog may have swallowed. Lots of times insects are in there. Sometimes there's nothing in there. Talia?
So when you're looking at a frog that's still alive, it looks like their stomach is going out and in. Are they digesting something or are they breathing?
No, breathing. So they don't have a diaphragm like we do to breathe in and out with their lungs. They have to use their abdominal muscles to bring air into their lungs. All right.
But when we breathe, sometimes our stomach goes out.
More of your chest. So the small intestine, so food is starting to be broken down in the stomach. What about the small intestine?
Oh,
Dan?
it breaks down the rest of it.
Continues to break down using enzymes, digestive enzymes, but also something else important happens in the intestine. David?
Isn't blood transported to?
Blood goes to the intestine. Why?
Oh, because the nutrients go into the...
Yeah, because that's where the nutrients from the food, after it's been digested, get absorbed in the blood to be transported around the body. So the small intestine continues digestion and then absorbs these nutrients from the foods that the frogs eat. Oops, sorry. So let me go back to the stomach picture. Well, it's kind of hard to see here. So we have the stomach. Basically, it just gets narrower and turns into the small intestine. On this frog, it's kind of hard, but this part here, it curves around and then goes behind in here. That's the small intestine. Okay? Called the small intestine, not because it's short, it's actually longer than the large intestine. Why is it called the small intestine then? Christopher? Yeah, it's narrower, much narrower. That's why it's called the small intestine.
Isn't the small intestine like a human, like if you unravel it and then that's
No, not quite that. Probably if you were to cut me open, stretch my intestine across the room, it'd probably reach to the back of the room, I would say. It's about like 25 feet or so. The large intestine, by the time food has gone through the stomach, then through all of the winding small intestine, basically it's been completely digested. All of the valuable nutrients have been absorbed into the blood. So what are you left with? Water
and the substance waste.
and waste, things that could not be digested. Okay? We would call feces, poop. Okay? That's non-digested stuff from the foods that we're eating. So in the large intestine, water can be reabsorbed because it's valuable for the animal. So it reabsorbs water, and so all you're left with by the end is undigested matter. So here, if we just look, we have stomach, small intestine, it winds back here, continues here. Then you see right here, this, where my mouse is the dividing line between small intestine, which is here, and then the probe is touching the large intestine. See how it goes from very narrow to very wide, okay? And so that's the large intestine. Then the cloaca is basically the body opening for all materials coming out of the frog. So feces comes out through this cloaca. In female frogs, eggs come out of the cloaca. Okay? In male frogs, sperm comes out of the cloaca. Urine comes out of the cloaca. It all comes out of this one opening, which is different from, for example, mammals, which have separate openings for feces and urine and reproductive products. Okay? So it's back here. It's sort of, it's not like right between the frog's legs. It's back a little ways here, okay, at the very edge of their back, and that's where those materials come out. Mesentery. So the mesentery, probably one you haven't heard of, I would guess. Mesentery is like this tissue, a transparent layer of tissue that basically holds all of the organs in place. When you first open up your frog, cut through the skin, cut through the muscle, you open it up, the organs are not like just sliding around inside of the frog. They're actually all sort of held together with this membrane. And part of what your job to do in the dissection is kind of separate this, you kind of break up this membrane so you can move the organs around more freely. The pancreas. What does a pancreas do? So there's a couple important functions of the pancreas. I think we talked about them when we talked about homeostasis a little bit. Christopher?
Does it produce enzymes?
Yeah, it produces insulin, hormone that helps regulate our blood sugar. That's produced by the pancreas. It also produces what are called pancreatic juices. These are digestive enzymes that are going to help in the digestion of food, and the pancreas releases them into the small intestine. Right?
So if you have like diabetes, does your pancreas just like not work as fast?
Certain cells, so your pancreas still produces like those pancreatic digestive enzymes, but there are special cells called beta cells in your pancreas. That's where the insulin's actually produced, and sometimes those beta cells don't work properly, and that's when a person has diabetes. Yes. Actually, so the pancreas, it's kind of, there's not a whole lot to it in the frog, to the pancreas. What you do is you look at the curve of the stomach, and between the curve of the stomach and the intestine, this thing right here is the pancreas, kind of tucked inside there. The spleen is an organ which helps to recycle red blood cells. Remember, red blood cells are constantly being destroyed and recycled. Okay, we have millions and millions of red blood cells in our bodies. They constantly have to be sort of recycled to get the useful components out of them, and new blood cells are created. It happens in the spleen. The spleen is, it looks in size and shape similar to the gallbladder, but its location and color are usually different. The spleen is usually reddish brown, and it's located back farther in the frog. So you have to see the spleen, you kind of have to move away the digestive organs, and it's behind them. So the probe here is touching the spleen. Okay, that thing. Again, this is the stomach, and we have small intestine, large intestine. Very good?
For the dissection, will there be like instructions like in order?
Yes. Yep. All right, the lungs, obviously, their function
Breathe.
to breathe, to take in
Oxygen.
and
Release CO2.
right. Okay, the spleen also holds red blood cells. It's a reservoir, holds up red blood cells that are going to be put into the body. So lungs, yeah, oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. They're pretty easy to find and identify in the frog, but it takes some work because they're way in the back of the frog. So this in this frog, and you might do this, is a bunch of organs have been removed to see the organs that are farther back in the frog to the dorsal part of the frog. So in this case, the liver's gone. Okay, the stomach and small and large intestine have all been removed so that you can see those other organs. And so these are the lungs. They're up high. They're on either side of the heart. Here's one and here's one. And they're kind of like a spongy texture to them. Usually they're kind of deflated, and you can find them in the back of the frog on each side of the heart. So this is a lung, this is a lung. The kidneys, what do they do? Can't live without your kidneys. They're really important. You know what they do?
They bring blood.
No, they filter your blood. They take waste out of your blood. Waste like nitrogen and ammonia and things like that. If those substances built up, they become toxic and you die. The kidneys filter them, and what do they produce? Where does that waste go? Yeah, they create urine.
Oh, that's what urine is?
Urine is
Wait.
water mixed with metabolic waste from all the
okay,
cells
I
of
was
the
about
body.
to say, I was like, so why would you drink water?
Yeah.
My cousin was having kidney transplant.
Oh, okay. So sometimes people have for various reasons, might have kidney disease, may have damage to a kidney, and they may need a kidney transplant. You can live just fine with a single healthy kidney. So sometimes people that have no healthy kidneys might get a donated kidney from a family member. They could take a kidney out of one person, transplant in the other. Sometimes, so people donate their organs after their death. If their organs are still working properly, a person can say, I would like to donate my kidneys. And so when a person that's an organ donor passes away, they can take their kidneys or other useful organs, and then there's a list of people waiting for a kidney transplant, and then they give them to people to help them live a healthy life.
So wait, how are they still working if they're dead?
Well, they harvest them very quickly. So when a person passes away, they usually have like 24 hours. So they know this person is so obviously if they had kidney disease, they wouldn't take those kidneys and use them for somebody. But if they died, for example, in a car accident or something, if it's found out that they're an organ donor, they may quickly take those organs and then they put them on, in a cooler. They'll stay viable for, a day or so. They fly them to wherever location they're needed and put them into that person.
Sorry, I'm another question.
That's okay.
So could you take two? Or from a person?
From a person that passed away, yes, you could take two, and you could take like many organs. So the kidneys take all the blood in your body, eventually goes to the kidneys. They take out all the waste, mix it with water to form urine, and send it to the urinary bladder. It just stores up urine until it can be eliminated. In female frogs, they have ovaries. Not male frogs, obviously. What do ovaries do?
Hold the fetus.
No. No.
Eggs.
They produce eggs. There's no embryo. Frogs don't get pregnant,
That's true.
right? Because they have external development. If you get a female frog, you may find it has eggs in it. Usually, if they have eggs, they take up a ton of space. Sometimes when we dissect a frog, we open up and it's filled with like this blackish stuff, and the organs are all kind of smushed. Those are eggs, because the female, remember, releases a lot of eggs at once. So that frog died when it had lots of these eggs inside of it. Male frogs obviously won't have ovaries. They'll have testes. Okay, testes are much smaller. They produce sperm. The tubes that carry sperm out of the frog's body from the testes, or carry the eggs out of the frog's body, are called the sperm duct and the oviduct. The sperm duct transports sperm from the testes out through the cloaca. And you would only see this in a male. It looks like a very, very fine tube, very, very narrow. So here you have two testes. These are the testes of the frog. This tiny little tube, or here you could see it, kind of looks like, it's all twisty. It looks like a ramen noodle. That twisty little line there, that is the sperm duct. The oviduct is much larger. The oviduct is much larger. If there's no eggs there, it may look like mashed potatoes. And it's much larger because the female frog produces a lot more eggs, and they're a lot larger than sperm cells. And a couple last things. Yeah. Transports eggs to the cloaca.
Can you not see the oviduct if there's a lot of eggs in there?
Yeah, the eggs are sort of in the oviduct. Yeah. Fat bodies we already talked about. What do they do?
Store energy.
Store energy for the frog to use during hibernation. They're very easy to find and identify. They're kind of orangish.
Do some of them not have it?
They almost all have some. Some have more than others. Here's a frog with lots of fat bodies.
It looks like one of those hot pockets.
The tympanum is the frog's eardrum. I guess we'll finish up with this tomorrow.